First time on the channel. Really, it's kind of one of those extremely under the radar whiskey brands type of whiskey here. And from quite possibly the smallest independent bottler on the island, or maybe one of the smallest independent bottlers on the island. Looking after the small guys today. Now, in fairness, you have to show love to every aspect of everyone in this industry, including the small guys. This is an ever-expanding big ocean of Irish whiskey. So let's drink some damn fine whiskey. Welcome to Rare Whiskey Wednesdays. I'm the Whiskey Chaser Brian here in Christy's bar. It's that time of the week for rare Irish whiskey. And what a whiskey. Single grain, cask strength, Oloroso finish. There's obviously a lot more going on in that, but I'm going to save that for the moment. Now, whiskeys like these are kind of rare at the moment. You know, acquiring this style of Irish whiskey and releasing it is becoming more and more scarce. I'm talking about this kind of an age statement for this particular style of whiskey. There are not too many on the ground, one or two, nothing major. So this, folks, is An FEAR GRiNN, the Tides In, a 13-year-old single grain Irish whiskey finished in Oloroso. Now, An FEAR GRiNN is the brainchild of George Keneally, or better known as Whiskey Factor, a small independent bottler based out of Dundalk, I believe. Back in the 80s, George joined the diaspora and only recently in the last 10 years decided to come home. And upon his arrival, shortly thereafter, started bottling and releasing whiskey. Quality whiskey. The thing about this and what I like about it is it's very under the radar. Sadly, it doesn't get enough hype, which is good for whiskey drinkers. And I can say that because I have had a few samples of his offerings from the brand and they are genuinely really good. Excuse me, anything I've had. Also, releases like these tend to be on the small bottling side of things. So I think 200 to 300 bottles yield per release-ish. Now, the ever-expanding market that is independent bottlers, I'd imagine, is a tough one to stand out in, which means one thing. When you uncover little gems like these, you can generally pick up a few for a reasonable price without them selling out in seconds, which is a major bonus for whiskey drinkers. Now, this whiskey here is different than some of what I've previously had, and indeed what I've had on the channel. It is, of course, a 13-year-old single grain, cask strength, double distilled whiskey, finished for 11 years, or 11 weeks, I should say, in a hand-picked Oloroso sherry cask. So very, very small amount of time in a sherry cask. There are only 212 bottles of this available, or were only 212. Looks to be still for sale on some of the online shops for in between 87 to 95 euros. Typically speaking, single grain whiskeys are quite light. Not a powerhouse of flavor like your malts and your pot stills at this age, but the fact that it's cask strength and finished in Oloroso, I imagine is going to add some, or a lot of character to this. Truth be told, and hands up, until recently, I wasn't really a huge fan of single grain Irish whiskies. I found them a bit bland, to be honest. I do like a little bit more of a robust kind of whiskey, and these kind of seemed a bit boring or not very exciting, but some recent releases have certainly got my attention. Now, this happens to be one of them. As you can see from the bottle here, there isn't much left. We did have a tasting here in Christie's recently. I'll tell you the opinions at the end, but enough chat for now. Let's get this into the glass and onto the palate. Flavor Town. And we pour. So while I'm letting that breathe very quickly, a double distilled 13-year-old single grain Irish whiskey. I'm guessing this is Cooley liquid. Duh, makes sense, double distilled. Finished for 11 weeks in Oloroso. Before that, bourbon casks, obviously 212 bottles, 57.8% ABV, so quite high in alcohol content and priced between 87 to 95 euros. I bought this in James Fox's in Dublin for around 90 euros a couple of weeks back. Right, so look, I've given this a couple of moments to breathe a little bit, swirl it around in the glass. Let's do some tasting notes. So, on the nose, you're met with a fair amount of white pepper spice at first and that Oloroso kind of sherry nuttiness to it. Now, This does evolve a little bit. There's a certain level of complexity here for this grain style, grain type of whiskey, this age statement. It's not as straightforward as you would think. There's a complexity here. Next on the nose, you're kind of getting those sherry fruits, right? So it's like a florally fruity nose, if that makes sense. Think like pear drop, stewed apples kind of sweetness to it, kind of stewed fruits kind of sweetness coming through on it. That, I want to say, florally essence without the flowers, that kind of combination of loveliness. You're getting a little bit of grain there as well. Nuttiness, definitely there. Oaky notes, definitely there. There's a nice bit of bite to this. On the nose then, still a little bit of vanilla towards the end. Sherry fruits, your dark fruits and all that kind of stuff is there. It's a little wild. It's a little wild on the nose, I'm not gonna lie to you. It's not for the faint-hearted. This is not for the faint-hearted whiskey drinker. This is a whiskey drinker's whiskey. Little bit of a briny note towards the very, very end, and that's just me nitpicking now. That could be first whiskey of the day. That's more alcohol content and kind of grape skin than brine. Let's have a little sup. Let's launch it. Spicy. Very spicy on the tongue. The front of the tongue is on fire here. Nutty. There's a grain element in there. Dark fruits are kind of first though. That sweetness of like black currants to me, maybe a little bit of plum as well in there, along with a touch of zest, kind of like an orange zest. Have another little sup. Let's launch it. Oaky, Oloroso nuttiness, I should say, along with the oak, ties in there nice. Dark chocolate as well is in there. There's a lot of heat. A lot of heat, and even a touch of anise, star anise, or however you pronounce it, note in there. Obviously vanilla, the oak. Certainly not for the faint-hearted. I think even then on the finish, you know, have like a grainy note, a honey syrupy kind of note there as well. Touch drying, spicy though, still quite spicy. Still, my throat is still kind of burning a nice bit. My sides of my tongue are, you know, burning a little bit. Still a bit of sweetness. It's coated the tongue quite nice though. I mean, I will say that. There's almost a slight burnt caramel note to it, or burnt sugar note to it. Serious hang time, it's still going. I think on the palate was a medium complexity. The nose slightly a little bit more complex. Medium complexity on the palate. Medium to kind of long finish on the end of it there. I'm just gonna finish this drop off. It's not it. Third time back, touch of bitterness there. Very, very slight. Yeah, 13-year-old single grain. Tapering off nicely. Hang time, it's got hang time. So the question is, do I like this? Yes, but I like it because it's a bit wild and robust. I do like the robustness myself. I do like the way it stands out. The spice depends on how bad my heartburn is that day. And I do suffer a bit from that, so I won't lie there. But on the night of the tasting though, a few did think the spice was too much for them, albeit they're kind of not into whiskey as much as I would be. I can see that, I can understand that myself. It is quite spicy, like I said. I'm not sure I would buy another bottle, but I did enjoy this one, to be fair. And obviously, as you can see, maybe enjoyed it a bit too much. I think this is a good whiskey drinker's whiskey. The element of Oloroso does a decent job here of adding complexity to the whiskey, although I think some might not agree. I can understand where they would come from on that. Well, I know some don't agree because they disagree with me on the night of the tasting. Now, as this is almost gone, it won't be for sale here behind the bar. You're just going to take my word for it, I guess. But cheers to Christy's anyway for being legends. And I did purchase this myself. Now, if you've gotten the chance to try this or you have tried any of An FEAR GriNN, leave a comment below and let me know your thoughts. Yeah, that's it really. That's all for this week's Rare Whiskey Wednesday. Working hard to get you more amazing whiskeys that are extremely rare. Cool. Until next time, keep it Irish and keep it rare. Sláinte.